Oh my god. They finally did it. Hey folks, I just, and I mean just, got done watching the finale to Daredevil Born Again, and I have to say, a lot was riding on the success of this episode. Now, I have a few narrative critiques of this entire project that I'll make once I have the time to think about and probably rewatch this entire season, but I absolutely have to address the fact that for once, the deranged anti-woke headlines will be at least partially right. This one might be a little bit disjointed, but I actually wrote my thoughts down, so hopefully they'll at least flow a little bit. Extreme spoilers from here on out. I was incredibly worried about this season's Punisher subplot. For quite some time leading up to Daredevil 2's release, fans were made aware that not only would Frank Castle be appearing in the revival, but he would also have a plotline in which he reckons with the fact that a large contingent of real-world police wear his logo as a badge of honor, erroneously believing themselves to be the last line of defense against a cartoonishly evil criminal underworld, a world that can only be defeated by brutal violence and extrajudicial killing. And let me tell you, that idea sounds great in theory, but I did not trust for a second that the Walt Disney Company would actually allow for a story that meaningfully addressed this subject under anything but the most sanitized circumstances. I was fully ready for another The Batman ending where all of the bad cops are stopped by all of the good cops in a nice feel-good manner that reminds us the system always works as it should, it just sometimes takes a little while. In essence, I was expecting a cop-out. Ha ha. Get it? And that's not to say that a story that fumbles at the last second is inherently bad. I liked The Batman quite a bit, but it does end up coming off as though the studio was too cowardly to address the fact that that is nowhere near how the real world works. Police frequently enact extreme, unjustified violence upon the populace, and in the rare instance that they suffer any sort of consequences for it, they are often permitted to just move to a new department with little more than a slap on the wrist. That is how the system often actually works. And mass media, which portrays it any other way, is at the very least sanitizing that reality and perpetuating the idea that once a few bad, non-bunch spoiling apples are found out, they are promptly dealt with in an appropriate legal manner. But Daredevil, for the most part, exceeded expectations to an almost staggering degree. Throughout this season, we've seen Mayor Wilson Fisk accumulating various violent police officers and corrupt officials, assembling a task force that he encourages to deal with street-level crime by any means necessary, and in the finale, that task force is in full swing, slaughtering low-level offenders and falsifying evidence, not unlike real-world officers have been known to do. Unlike many other depictions of corrupt law enforcement where the primary motivating factor is portrayed as money or self-preservation, these cops genuinely believe that criminals of any kind, other than themselves, are less than human, that their lives should be ended not because they're presenting a clear and present danger and all other options have been exhausted, but because they simply deserve death. These same cops attack our protagonists at home, and we get to see exactly how the writers of Daredevil Born Again believe these sorts of people should be dealt with. Those who would use their state-granted power, their monopoly on violence, to prey on the less fortunate. The same violence that they willingly enact on, to be clear, primarily minority populations, is justifiably used in self-defense by Matt and Frank. The ensuing fight is kind of brutal, with Matt beating the shit out of government-sanctioned killers, while Frank more often than not takes the headshot as he is wont to do. Now, am I saying that Daredevil is encouraging people to actually do what Frank is doing in this scene? Probably not, and neither am I, to be clear. The show very obviously, I think, sides with Daredevil in this confrontation, taking the position that if your life is threatened by an agent of the state, you have the right to defend yourself. And given the nature of television to exaggerate things, I would guess that the writers probably still wouldn't advocate for what Daredevil does in this fight either. And also, neither would I. More often than not, as vile as it feels to say this, if a police interaction is becoming heated, the best thing you can do is whatever you're told. A lot of cops expect to be treated like wild animals, where any sudden move is justification for deadly force, and I do not, under any circumstance, want to encourage a situation like that escalating any further than it has already. The point that I'm getting at is that in the world of art, Daredevil actually takes a bold stance here. It looks in the face of our often authoritarian system and says, no, it's not just a few bad apples. It is a fundamentally rotten system that needs to be dismantled. This is both stated in dialogue and shown through actions. The one major police-aligned character who speaks out against Fisk's increasingly dictatorial actions is swiftly disposed of in a brutal scene that I wouldn't show even if I had the footage, mirroring real-world examples of whistleblowers being excised, their calls for backup ignored, their safety being placed in significantly more danger than the average officer actually faces. And damn, let's talk about Fisk. I don't want to gush too terribly hard. This is still Disney, and we hopefully know how much we should despise Disney as an organization. Their monopoly should still be dismantled, etc., etc. But seriously, if you are going to do a Trump parody in 2025, this is how you should do that. You don't need to lean into the liberal Saturday Night Live, silly idiot with his band of misfits portrayal. A portrayal that I think, honestly, even Saturday Night Live is starting to lean away from at least a little bit. You don't need to repeat the same repetitive jokes that have become so recognizable that even the average non-conservative person will often immediately start tuning you out upon hearing them. Instead, you portray his ideas and actions exactly as they are. Fascistic and evil. To an extent, this portrayal was a little bit prophetic. To the best of my knowledge, conservative circles weren't openly discussing the idea of ending due process, the fundamental basis for our admittedly very flawed rule of law. Even if they really, really wanted to be talking about that, I don't think that they were outright saying that we don't believe in the rule of law anymore. But they are now using terminology that is almost identical to what Mayor Kingpin is using in this episode, to the point where it almost felt like this was written in the last week.
Do they have any due process at all?
Confident. Look, due process. Where's Lake and Ronnie's due process?
Good point. Border czar Tom Homan vowing to continue deportations.
Every authoritarian action Fisk takes is both transparently evil and justified using the exact same logic that our court-defying emperor uses to advance his agenda. The comparison works largely because it's woven directly into the narrative in a way that never feels like it's grabbing your shoulders and shaking you with the point. As much as I love stories like that, they don't work anymore, and they probably won't work for a very long time. Instead, we see a villain who we've known for years acting in character to do the exact same things that a real-world dictator in progress is doing. In some cases, as I've said, before he even does them. I don't know, fuck, man. This was, like, actually refreshing. The next season still has the chance to screw this up. The bit at the end does sort of imply that the good cops are gonna rise up and defeat the bad ones, but even if it does that, assuming that the story follows through on its promises, they have acknowledged that for that to happen, the system that allows Fisk's task force to exist will need to be destroyed. Disney finally did something woke, even if it wasn't for that long, and I am glad, if nothing else, to see popular culture addressing the evils and excesses of our oligarchy in a semi-honest way. Thank you for watching. Check out the first few chapters of my book back there in the description, and have a daredevil-tastic day.